Obviously, the rumors flowing around this weekend, very, very much all about Penny Mordaunt, what she's going to be doing. Will this supposed alliance between the right wing and the moderates come to fruition, and thus enable a crowning of Penny Mordaunt? Um, and it's all, of course, based on this last week. Sunak, of course, hasn't had a very particular good last week. Obviously, he's had a defection of Lee Anderson. There's been the whole row over the Tory donor and the comments he made about Diane Abbott. It just, shall we say, has not been a very good week for Rishi Sunak. But a lot of people have said how just weak, once again, Rishi Sunak is. And I have been making this case since the very beginning. Rishi Sunak is just a weak prime minister. He is a weak leader, and he doesn't really seem to be able to, well, do anything because he is so terrified of, if he actually did something, that would split the party, meaning he'd have to, deal with the consequences of that. And rather than move forward and try and get something done, and bear in mind, not only is this parliament so far the lowest working parliament because of the number of chaoses we've constantly had, but from last year as well. So it's not like exactly this parliament is really doing anything at the moment. So why on earth is he just not calling a general election? Well, your guess is as good as mine. And like I say, we still don't know, particularly when it's going to be. Is he generally seriously going to hang on? And maybe we're going to end up with a late November, December general election. Is he going to hold on till the summer? I don't know. He's ruled out May the 2nd, but this is now where I think the pressure gets on him. And this is why you saw the whole Chicken Rishi thing pop up as well. But enough about what I'm sort of thinking and my sort of interpretation of this. Let's look today at what Conservative Home makes of all this. Because, as I've said before, why we cover Conservative Home, it has a very, very deep reach into sort of the non-parliamentary Conservative Party, and it has quite an influence on them. So let's see what they are saying about this, because they have so far haven't mentioned this, but one thing that Will Atkinson has now come forward to, our, of course, favourite T-boy, of course, over at Conservative Home, the guy who, when he first encountered actual Conservative voters, balked at the idea that this was your average Conservative voter, but there you go. We're going to have a look what he's had to say about this and this chaos and what he thinks of all this, because honestly, it's bizarre, it's funny. Once again, he doesn't really seem to acknowledge the writing on the wall, but there you go. So, before we go on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, as always, down below there are links to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, thank you very much to all the people who do help and support the channel. Like I say, even if you do, just click the like and share button. And of course, on into this. So, as we said, come from Conservative Home, the title of Has Last Week Made a Leadership Challenge to Sunak More Likely? So, when sorrows come, they come not single spies, but in battalions. Rishi Sunak presses Gillian Cooper to William Shakespeare. But last week's trials will have left the Prime Minister recognising a very little of his own plight in Claudius's words, 20 points behind in the polls, hemming a very apathetic ministers and a mutinous backbenchers. He finds something rotten in the state of his government. So why doesn't he do anything about it? I'm sort of shocked. This hasn't become the calling card from the Conservative, or even people like Will Atkinson himself. If that is the state of his party, why is Sunak not doing anything about it? Why is he just sitting there doing nothing? Just remember, this was the guy who was being brought in after the chaos of Johnson and Truss. He was the one who was going to clean it all up and right the ship of state and would be, sailing back along again. That hasn't happened because he has done nothing. But I am shocked that more Conservatives aren't just calling out Sunak for his own inaction on this. But anyway, back to this. So after last week's fruitless budget, Monday's double whammy of Lee Anderson hoofing to Reform UK and the uncovering of Frank Hessler's appalling comments about Diane Abbott raised fundamental questions about the Prime Minister's good sense. Anderson absconding was hardly unexpected, but it doesn't help as a Tory and Reform UK poll ratings have now nudged even closer together. Yet, as MPs cross at number 10 for Anderson's suspension, won't have been Sunak fans in the first place, hence why the Hester row was so damning. However, this is sweet millions now do sit in CCHQ's coffers, and it would be absurd to send Mel Stride out to suggest that Hemster's comments about Abbott should be shot for making you, quote, want to hate all black women were not, quote, gender-based or race-based. Again, I can't even believe they actually trotted him out to say that. That is like, out of all the weeks, out of all the ridiculous, out of like the sheer, the train that's clearly on fire, already derailed, not about to stop, and yet they wheeled this guy out and he comes and says that. Like, it was not the best look. I mean, there's now, I think one of the things Labour should have done was have a look at Mel Stride and say, well, hey, maybe you should remove the whip from Mel Stride after saying that, After all, you removed the one from Anderson for saying something like that. I don't know. I'm very surprised I haven't seen comments from the opposition about that, but there you go. But it has been a very bad week for Rishi Sunak. Maybe someone has said it at some point and I've missed it. So number 10 should have immediately said that Hester's comments were racist to move the story on. Taking it until Tuesday evening, and only after Kimmy Badenoch's intervention, allowed the vacuum to be filled by the left's righteous indignation. Righteous indignation. I just think you mean calling it out for what it was. And yeah, I'm glad at least you're acknowledging that it took that long and the intervention of Kimmy Badenoch. And yet still, you have all that money sitting in his coffers. And one of the things that is worth saying, one of the things that is worth pointing out, there's a lot of people saying that CCHQ cannot afford to give that money back. That's what a lot of people are saying. This is why they can't give the money back. They can't afford to. So interesting times probably going on behind the scenes at CCHQ. Like I say, this is probably something find out maybe, and I don't know, maybe after the next general election or maybe like next 5 or 6 years, we'll find out what's going on. But yeah, interesting times ahead for the Conservative Party indeed. So, even so, as the damnable is now dragging one's feet, is condemning Hester was. It wasn't the most fundamental of the Prime Minister's problems. Currently, I love it. Oh, that's not one of his fundamental problems when he's, refuses to do anything. The real nickname for Rishi Sunak should be Rishi Do Nothing Sunak. Or Do Nothing Rishi. Because that is what he continues to do. Nothing. I have said that, I don't know how many times on this channel, just pointing out that regardless of whatever situation seems to happen, Rishi Sunak just sits there and just does nothing. He's like a deer caught in the headlights. So currently the Conservatives polling under 25%. The public hate the Tories, want Sunak gone, and is set to give Labour a landslide. This reality now appears to be dawning on even the most well-insulated of Tory MPs. What can be done? So, of course, this is probably now going to get into the dreaded, again, prospect of having another leadership challenge or a prospect, and of course, crowning Penny Mordaunt. Bear in mind, you look at Penny Mordaunt's polls in her seat, she doesn't look like she will be able to hold it. So that will be incredibly embarrassing should the leader of your party lose her seat on a general election night, regardless of how the rest of the general election goes. So for the Sunak skeptical amongst them, there are major options. They can just hand in their notice to hop from to hop to the front of the queue for lobbying gigs. They could join Anderson in the charge of the Right Brigade, or they can once again give into a very deep, desperate reflex of smashing the glass marked leadership challenge. Blood will have blood, and if one allows allows to switch plays. Yeah, doing so and having this and switching leaders once again would not be popular. It will not go down not only with the current membership, it will not go down well with the public. If it goes to a leadership contest, that will be incredibly damaging even more for them. Because I'll tell you now, the people who are left, or at least who would throw their hat into the ring, would seriously just, I don't know, run a God knows what type of campaign. I mean, just imagine for a second if you got Kimmy Badenoch, Suella Braverman, and Penny Mordaunt as like your three frontrunners. Like just that contest alone is just guaranteed to just be so bad for the party and make them look so awful that regardless of whoever wins, their certain defeat is almost going to be guaranteed at the general election, because that is the other thing that people are going to say. Well, now you've had this, when are you going to meet? Because that's the first question they're going to be asked among coming prime minister. When's the next general election going to be? Anyway, reports abound of the dark mutterings amongst ministers and backbenchers, but a wise one once told me not to trust what one reads in the weekend papers. I said this as well when I saw that. I've said it in the short, which in the short I did. I said it in the video I did. Take it very, very much with a grain of salt. Bear in mind, we've heard this type of stuff said before. Will it come to pass? Who knows? Until it actually happens, it's mere rumor. Until there's proper evidence of that happening. So back to it. So only Simon Clarke and Andrea Jenkins have gone public. Mandy Rice Davis rules apply to both, and the temperature has now been rising for months. Mysterious opinion polls, anonymous briefings, drag pubs in Trafalgar Square. It is the same old, same old. The obvious flashpoint for a challenge would be in May's local elections. That's probably what it could trigger this. It's probably what could also trigger a general election as well. The outcome, or the outlook for the Conservatives at the May's local elections, going to be bad. Not only just locally, but losing Ben Houchen, which, as I've said before, next to general election, probably one of the most important votes coming up in the country. Getting rid of Houchen would be a massive boon, and we can finally find out just what is going on in that Freeport. So a worst case scenario would be councils lost across the red and blue walls. Ben Houchen and Andy Street's hard work unrewarded. Again, Ben Houchen doing hard work. He's done nothing except really just focus on getting that Freeport. Andy Street, I think you can argue either way. Again, but Ben Houchen, all he's done is just focus on the Freeport. He staked his entire campaign on getting that Freeport done, up and running, and yet there's just so much dodgy stuff going on around it that it needs to now to be looked at. And honestly, any of the candidates is going to become a central pillar to what's going on there. And the push to remove him does look to be incredibly serious, and I think it will succeed in quite a significant way, as we've seen in the polls recently when we last looked at it. Susan Hall will be roundly trounced in London, and the Scythologists would soon be using the figures to predict a general election wipeout. MPs would know by how much they were going to lose their seats. We've heard again the move en masse as it won't, but the problems are obvious. Despite the evidence of the last 5 years, remaining a Conservative leader is supposed to be difficult. 15% of Tory MPs are required for a confidence vote. That's 53 letters, at least on the current numbers. But do the rebels have that? Over the Windsor, Rwanda, and Sunak successfully called his critics' bluff. Will it be third time unlucky? Probably. I mean, the Windsor framework was like the last chance of the Brexiteers. Rwanda, Sunak actually gave in to his rebels. they were allowed to make the amendments that they wanted to make, knowing full well that when it went to the Lords, those amendments would be undone, which is they have been now, which is another thing that's going to happen this week. Sunak possibly clashing with the Lords about that Rwanda bill. So yeah, it could very well be third time unlucky. So even if sufficient letters could be convinced to land on Graham Blady's doormat, Sunak's opponents would then have to win a confidence vote against him. Both Theresa May and Boris Johnson survived them, but both were gone within months. Partly because even if you survive the confidence vote, just as, again, Boris Johnson did, a significant portion of his party just did not have confidence in him. And at that point, your job becomes just untenable. And I think that's another thing that people are worried about, that even if you do have that, you get those letters and then the confidence vote would then come after. Remember, that's a free vote of confidence. And MPs given that free hand to vote which way they would like, it would certainly, I think, unravel the scale of no confidence in Sunak. And he would be put possibly, I think, quite in the same position of maybe even Boris Johnson, maybe just surviving it. But Sunak can call a general election whenever he likes. And again, why doesn't he call one? But obviously that's the last, as we said, many of the threat he hasn't really deployed that threat. But as we said before, he can only really do it once. And then if you don't call it, well, bluff called. Why give the unhappy Tory MPs the satisfaction of doing the voters' job for them? Give them their P45s. But could Sunak be convinced to resign? I don't think so. I don't think he could be convinced to resign at all. Sunak is sailing along, pretty much convinced he's doing a good job. We've seen that in his press conferences, his statements, the stuff that he does. Yeah, it's delusional. Yeah, but there you go. The May example, of course, does present itself. She resigned the day after the Conservatives came fifth in the 2019 European Parliamentary elections with only 8.8% of the vote. However, bad the local elections are, no poster is predicting that Sunak hasn't been exhausted by the Brexit wars, even if he is a Californian dreaming and he quit, but he quite likes being the Prime Minister. I think the May elections going to be quite significant. I think May election is going to be incredibly significant. And if they are bad, which all the polls are looking like, yes, they are going to be quite bad, then a lot of MPs are not going to be very, very happy. And there is going to be a lot of movement in and around that. So, yeah, local elections, do please go out and vote. As we've said many, many times before, the turnout for local elections very, very low. But if you want to sort of get a general election, I think that's a message we should be spreading, that if Sunak still hasn't called a general election and the May elections are around the corner, get out and vote and just, deliver the Conservatives defeat after defeat after defeat in those local elections. Because if you do, that makes a general election more likely round the corner. So again, a message I think we should be spreading on that. So back to it. So even if those not so insignificant hurdles were then overcome, the leadership election would be no cakewalk for Sunak skeptics. As Peter Franklin has pointed out, three options for selecting a replacement would be a full leadership contest as Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, and MPs only ballot, with one saying of the final two dropping out, as with May, and a coronation, as with Sunak. Each is very flawed. His critics on the right so far, in loud demanding tax cuts and, of course, a stiff approach to Rwanda, would have to confront the fact the bulk of MPs on the Tory benches are out of sympathy with their ambitions, even if they did agree with them on Sunak to go. The One Nation group cannot just be wished away. Why remove Sunak only to see him be replaced by Jeremy Hunt? Stranger things. I don't think he'd be replaced by Jeremy Hunt. No way. You look at how this would go, I don't think he'd be replaced by Jeremy Hunt. I don't think Jeremy Hunt would want the job, to be honest. I think if anyone was to put it from the One Nation group, it would be Penny Mordaunt if that were to happen. So I would really challenge Will on the fact that Jeremy Hunt would just be replaced by him. Of course, a quick glance at our cabinet league table would suggest that the Chancellor is not what one would call a frontrunner. The two ministers currently topping of the list are Penny Mordaunt and Kimi Badenoch. Both have been at the top of our table and both stood in 2022. Both formed our panel's perspective, the final two in the belated contest. Both are ladies not unblessed with ambition. I think they absolutely would run. I think it would be very likely if it did go to a leadership contest, it would be a Mordaunt Badenoch two-horse race. I think Badenoch would probably win, given the fact that she's in the polls at the Conservative Home leadership poll of polls that they've always been done, have been very accurate in predicting who's going to be the next leadership candidate and who's going to be the next leader of the party. And that front runner is Kimi Badenoch. Kimi Badenoch storming ahead every single time in those polls. If it came down to that type of leadership contest, Kimi Badenoch would win. Penny Mordaunt wouldn't. And again, Kimi Badenoch, I think, would perform absolutely dire. But then again, so would Penny Mordaunt. Someone I saw a piece recently about asking that very question: is Penny Mordaunt actually ready to be PM? I think there's just as many examples of Kimi Badenoch being not ready to be PM, just as there are Penny Mordaunt. Both would be really bad in their positions. But there you go. So leaving aside their other qualities, the two would face very different prospects at the next election. The electoral calculus has Badenoch just clinging on in Saffron Walden, but Mordaunt would lose Portsmouth North by a marginal of more than 10%. If they are the frontrunners, and if Badenoch waits, she's on track to be the next leader of the opposition. Mordaunt will be unemployed. And that is what a lot of people are thinking, that Badenoch is quite happy not to have a leadership contest, because remember, there was a very similar push not too long ago, just like there was with Penny Mordaunt, where Badenoch had to come out and say, no, I'm not going to be a leader. I'm not involved in any, plots to replace Sunak. I would never want to replace Sunak, she said, with, fingers crossed behind her back. So if she wants to be Prime Minister, she has more of an incentive to act as soon as possible. Her role as Leader of the Commons provides plenty of opportunities to meet and fraternise with her fellow MPs. Sunak should have sent her to transport. Whatever her previous foibles, her coronation antics have provided a public platform for her colleagues can only dream of. Yet, could the lady who once carried the sword of state pull another from a stone? I am very doubtful of that. I am very doubtful because I said it before in my video. What has Penny Mordaunt got to offer or could do differently that Sunak currently isn't doing? I just don't see that. I don't see how she's the savior. Again, exactly the same stuff that was said about Sunak when he was brought in. So you could not have another contest, and the only possible candidate I can see now uniting behind people is Penny, as source has told the Daily Mail. Reports now suggest that a hard right-wing group of MPs have told Mordaunt and allies that they would settle for her, and the poll suggests she's at least Britain's most popular Conservative. Yeah, popular Conservative, but given the fact that she would be Prime Minister, leading this current Conservative Party, what is she going to do different? What exactly is she going to bring to this role that Sunak is not? That is what you are not seeing a lot of people ask, because the answer to that is not a lot. She brings nothing else new to the table. So whatever one makes of Mordaunt's recent public notoriety, primarily predicated on a carrying of a sword, naval vibes, and of course taking the mick of the recalcitrant Scots, the idea of her being the new face of the Tory right seems to be quite bizarre. Exactly. I will agree with Will on this one. Yeah, it doesn't seem, because as we've said, and we know multiple times, we've seen this played out, that centrist group, which Mordaunt is a part of, and that Tory right do not get along with each other. They hate each other. The idea that they would back her, as I said in my initial video when we covered that, very bizarre. I don't think this is right. I think this is just someone trying to fire a signal flare up, just like we saw a couple of weeks ago or at least a couple of months ago now, when Badenoch was in a very similar position. The only difference is that Mordaunt hasn't come out and denied it, where Kimmy Badenoch came running out almost, and started waving her hands around me saying, "I'm not involved in any plots." Or at least she probably is, but any plots, shall we say, would probably come in after the general election for her, of course, if she manages to hold on. So hence why the very same week the party's right is supposedly sounding her out. Some are now briefing about her as the last great hope of the one nation Toryism. The truth is that Mordaunt, blessed with the obvious confidence, has become a very useful focus for desperate MPs still railing against the inevitable, that Sunak skeptics should be careful what they wish for. They can always get a worse O Canada. Again, worrying about 93 there. But we've talked about Canada and 93 many times. We did a whole video about Canada 93. Number 10's plans are, of course, very plain. Finally get flights off to Rwanda. That's very likely not going to happen. I do not think any of that is going to happen, given the fact of what's going on in the Lords in Rwanda. We probably should do an update about that and what's going on in the Lords about that. But like I say, things are going to kick off this week about that. So don't worry. We've got you probably covered for that this week. Cross their fingers as the economy tries to recover, and have another budget in September to finally pass tax cuts big enough for voters to pay the slightest bit of notice. Again, tax cuts just aren't going to do it. The idea that you can just cut taxes is a nonsense statement, because it always comes back to, well, okay, if you're going to reduce the size of the budget, what exactly are you not going to fund, when we can see multiple times from multiple polls, even Conservatives, they want fully funded, good public services. And the only way you can do that is with taxes. You can't just go start cutting taxes, just hoping the economy can provide. Otherwise, what happens if the economy goes down again, stagnates, whatever? There are significant problems if you start to rely on that. So none of this looks any different from what now has come before, but it is the best that Conservatives can now hope for. Vote Leave is not going to come to their rescue again. The plan, of course, is not working. Sunak has ducked every opportunity for a radical change of approach. His receipts are not are lost between bad luck and self-indulgence, but he is honourable, doing his best with a vile inheritance. Then why hasn't he actually done anything about this? And I would challenge Will on what exactly has Sunak done. He's basically sat on his hands, and he's just sat there whistling in the vain hopes that something happens. I mean, what policies has he actually put forward? I mean, but people say, "Oh, Rwanda." No, what are his policies that he has actually put forward? Like his policies that he can actually say are his. He's not put anything forward like that. Rwanda is not his. That's the Tory rights, brainchild. There's nothing really he can say or tie himself to, and he's done nothing to get the leadership or anything like that. It's it's dire. It's very dire. And we'll just finish this off, because a Labour government would hold very few charms, but Sunak's critics should focus on rebuilding after the election, not briefing their idle fantasies every which way you look, you lose. Sunak is going to lose the next general election. Congratulations. At least there is now some of that now setting in Conservative home. Of course, we'll probably get in the lead up to the May elections more delusional Conservative councillors crowing about the fact that they managed to hold on to a seat, one Conservative seat last local election, and now they're probably going to lose it. So if there's anything you take away, and I do realize this has been quite a long video, if there's anything you take away from this video, I think we need to start getting the message out that the local elections, we need to get and mobilize people to get out and vote, because that is going to be, I think, a very, very big indicator in that. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.